National security doesn't really exist without the military forces and supporting civilians to carry it out. Recruitment, though, remains a problem for the armed forces, and there's a lot of stress on the civilian workforce at the moment. For some ways forward, we turn to someone who's examined national security human capital in detail. She's the Director of Studies at the Center for New American Security, Katherine Kuzminski. Katherine, good to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
And you have sort of opened a center at CNAS, a CNAS New Center, to look at this issue. I mean, let's talk about the civilian side first.
Yes.
A lot of people being fired, a civilian workforce that does everything from acquisition to analysis of programs. What's going on there, and what should happen at this point in our history?
I think it's worth pointing out that there's been bipartisan agreement for decades that civil service does need some reform. And we see two types of civilians who serve in national security. We have our national security political appointees, so the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State.
And you're throwing the intelligence community in as part of that also?
Correct. That's right. And there are certain skills, abilities, experiences that we expect of individuals who are nominated for those positions. Certainly, we've seen from a bipartisan perspective over the last 12 years, we had two general officers, former general officers, who were nominated into the position of Secretary of Defense. And while they have very valuable experience and by all means performed well in their roles, there is an acknowledgement that there are certain skills and experiences that civilian national security professionals who have grown up alongside general officers have a different skill set than those who were in uniform for that period of time. So one of the things that we're looking at is categorizing what are those knowledge, skills, and experiences that we would expect of a senior political appointee, both so that a president has a battery of things to be looking at, and also for the Senate in their confirmation hearing process, know what skills they're looking for in those nominees.
And we had an experiment in the country for the national security workforce. There was a system under President George W. Bush, the National Security Workforce System, or whatever they called it. Nobody liked it. Congress did away with it. And so is it possible to reform how things are done other than the way the current administration seems to be going about it, which is simply mass firings?
Yeah, so when we look at the civil service side of the House, as you mentioned, we have professionals with the institutional knowledge across organizations, the relationships between the interagency, the experience working in support of political appointees who transition as administrations change. And there are specific skills and experiences that we would want to be looking for in those individuals. Prior attempts at reform really butt up against a bit of the civil service protections, right? So it is really difficult to fire a poor performer. And that's been a challenge regardless of whether a Democrat or a Republican has been in the White House. And there is a need to reform, but particularly in the national security community where the stakes are so high, where the threat level from across the globe is so high, it's important to make sure that there's a surgical approach to that, even if we're going down to the same numbers as the DOGE cuts might project right now, as opposed to using that scalpel approach as opposed to a sledgehammer, to ensure that we're maintaining and building the talent, the current talent we need, and the pipeline of talent that we'll need to replace those individuals.
Right, and this is an off-the-wall question, but do you wonder whether the mass layoffs and the general sense on at least the employees' part of disrespect could even turn some people against the nation? And, you know, there are occasional people that double spy. They come up, these famous cases from time to time. Could this maybe precipitate some of that?
I'm less concerned about that and more concerned about the fact that we need the most talented individuals to be building the right credentials to serve in government. And we also have to recognize that it is an act of service, right? And that a lot of the folks who have the talent and experience that we want to access, they tend to have a lot of options on the outside. And so framing government service as low productivity work and private sector work as high productivity work adds another layer to the vision of service, that we're already relying on folks, the number of folks who've come out of government who have a Harvard Law School degree and 15 years of experience who say, I could go to the tech company. I don't want to. I want to find a way to continue to serve.
Yes, we do find those people, yeah.
Yeah.
You'd think the world is only oligarchs on one side and a bloated, corrupt bureaucracy on the other, and that's what each side calls the other. It's terrible. We're speaking with Katherine Kuzminski, Director of Studies at the Center for a New American Security. And let's talk about the military side. We've seen, there's always a little bit of political, static that discharges on the very highest levels when you are at the Joint Chiefs and so forth. But we've seen firings of lots of just general officers who, what did I do type of thing going on now. And then we've got the recruitment issue. So what are some of your thoughts on, let's start with the firing of these high-level general officers, many of whom have been female. What kind of message are we getting here?
Yeah, so this is where the president has a very wide purview in who he nominates or keeps on, particularly in those 3- and 4-star billets. The role of the Senate in confirming the replacements for those positions will be vital as we're looking at the credentials of folks coming in or that the president is nominating into these positions. The reality is we are pulling from a very talented pool of individuals when we look at that top level. And while a president may be selecting based on certain criteria that they're looking for in their senior leaders, they're also pulling from a pool of people who are the equivalent of the valedictorian, class president, and captain of the football team. And so I do have a lot of faith in the professionalism of the individuals that would be nominated to replace. It does send a message through the force, right? So there's been a lot of pointing back to Truman's firing of MacArthur or Obama's firing of McChrystal, but those had a clear explanation to the public. On the flip side, we do see the reduction or the removal from command of, folks at the 06 level in all of the services almost weekly. And the reason given is usually loss of faith and confidence in their ability to lead. So it is more vague. So on the one hand, it is fully within the president's purview to fire senior military officers. And on the other hand, it does send a chilling effect through the force when we saw the removal of women.
Yes, because you don't want to have a military cadre of officers that look like, when you see those scenes of North Korea, a bunch of grinning morons with little pads they're writing down. They have their stars and stripes because of their loyalty to the dear leader there, and that's not something we ever had or want in the United States. And on the recruitment level, the intake of the people that will become flag officers at some point, what is the issue and how can the military get around this? It's maybe a societal problem that's much bigger than the military. Yeah, so there's certainly been a lot of coverage since early February that the tides have turned on recruiting and that we're seeing better numbers, particularly in the Army in recruitment. And I think there's a couple things going on there. It's been marketed as, the Trump bump, or that all it took was having the change in the president, which we heard at the State of the Union or the joint address to Congress back in January. But I think we're also seeing the building on 4 years of successive attempts to address the process, the institution, the structure of the recruiting enterprise itself. In the Army alone, we saw that the escalation of the head of recruiting from a 2-star to a 3-star billet. That person now reports directly to the Secretary of the Army, so there's more accountability. We see a professionalization across the recruiting force. And I think that has taken years to see the fruits of that labor. We also saw the execution of the Future Soldier Prep Course and the Future Sailor Prep Course that are taking American youth who are really interested in service but might not meet the standard, getting them up to the standard, sure, and then having them start basic training at the end of this prep course. So I think we're seeing the fruits of the successive labors there. And, as a social scientist, you have to be open to the fact that there can be some explanatory power in the fact that there was a change in administration. I think there's some good data out there that indicate that
when districts that vote Republican, when there's a Democratic president, you see a decline in recruitment, and when there's a Republican president, you see an increase. And on the Democratic side, you see more consistency across the board. And so that may have some explanatory value, but I also think there have been institutional and procedural changes.
Sure, yeah. It's hard to know what cause and effect really is in this type of situation. And finally, the CNAS's own new Center for National Security Personnel, Human Capital. What do you do there, by the way?
Yeah. So the National Security Human Capital Program at CNAS, we are focused on looking at a data-driven approach to the requirements that we see for national security civilians in line with the requirements that are set very well within the Department of Defense and the military services when it comes to what are the actual, not just numbers of individuals that we need, but the qualities and the skills that align with that. And then that also drives a more informed conversation of civil relations. So what's the proper relationship between our civilian political leaders and the military, which I think also has implications for the recruitment process.
Katherine Kuzminski is Director of Studies at the Center for a New American Security. As always, good to have you in.
Thank you.
And we'll post this interview along with a link to more about the Human Capital Program at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Recruit the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.